This incident happened on the night of 31st December, when everyone was celebrating New Year. It started at about dinner time when my boyfriend and I were cleaning up and getting ready to have people over. We kept losing things, then finding them right back in the same place a few minutes later. We thought we were just imagining it, but it kept happening over and over. It seemed like every time we needed something, it would disappear. After finally getting everything cleaned, my friend Carson arrived. He, my boyfriend, and I were sitting there watching TV, talking about nothing in particular, when my boyfriend said something, and an unknown man's voice said, "Right," in return. The three of us were so confused we looked everywhere to see if our roommates had come home, but no one was there. We told them about it later, and they told us that they had been hearing the same thing since the night of the eclipse. A while later, I went to the bathroom and I heard a loud cough behind my ear as I was washing my hands. All the hair on my neck stood up and I ran out of there. No one that was there believed me until the rest of our guests showed up. I was drinking after that, and so was everyone else except for the two designated drivers. One got there before the other, and they both said they heard a cough when they were in the bathroom. They didn't know I had heard it or that each other had either, so it's not hard to tell why everyone believed me after that. Nothing happened to me the rest of the night, but in the morning when I was sobered up as well as everyone else, I heard the cough again. Nothing has happened since, though. I am getting worried about holidays and whatnot because it seems that is the only time anything really happens around here. A married couple had been fighting a lot and were very aggressive with each other, and it looked like they were going to get divorced. However, the wife discovered she was pregnant, and for the sake of the baby, they decided to give the marriage another try. The boy was born and the family had a short period of tranquility, but before long the old hostilities resurfaced and the father and mother were fighting all the time. One night when the boy was about 5 years old and they had put him to bed, the couple got into an enormous row, and in a fit of rage the father put his hands around his wife's neck and choked the life out of her. When he eventually realized what he had done, he began to panic. He knew he had to get rid of the body. He bundled the body into the boot of his car, and as dawn was breaking, he drove out of town to a swamp. He took the body from the car, but rigor mortis had started to set in, and it was difficult to carry her, so he slung her across his back like giving her a piggyback, and waded out into the foul-smelling swamp, where he let her go and watched the stiff hands and wretched face recede into the murky swamp water. The man went home and cleaned up and got in the shower, but he couldn't get rid of the foul stench of the swamp that made him sick to his stomach. Now how hard he scrubbed or how much he showered, it followed him wherever he went. As the days passed, the boy became anxious for his mother and asked all kinds of questions. The father told him his mother had gone to stay with relatives. One day the man noticed his son was looking at him in a strange way. The smell was as strong as ever. Every time he approached his son, he recoiled in horror. He wouldn't let him touch him. Eventually, he walked into his child's room as he was playing on the floor. "Son, is there something you want to say to me?" "Yes, father." "Is it about your mother?" "Yes." "What is it?" "Why is Mammy's face so pale?" "What do you mean?" "And why have you been giving her a piggyback all day?" As the guards escorted Leon down the corridor, which led to the injection room, he knew he wasn't ready to die. The warden of Northway Passage Prison stood outside the room with a sick, toothless grin on his face. It was obvious he got some sort of sick pleasure out of this. It satisfied him knowing he was about to free up some space in his precious iron hotel. It unnerved Leon. Leon Danica realized he would not feel any human emotion in a few minutes, even though he knew many people wanted him to die. The room he was being led into was like a shoebox. It was cold and dirty, with a strapped chair in the middle. It reminded Leon of a dentist chair. Next to the chair was a silver table with a collection of needles and syringes on it, but Leon recognized what one was going to kill him. The guards and the warden had disappeared. Leon looked at the mirror in the room and knew it was two-way, that they were watching him face the Reaper from behind the glass. The prison doctor lay Leon on the chair and strapped him in. A tear rolled down Leon's cheek. Leon felt his hand twitch. He became aware of an itch in his back and his eyes shot open. The realization hit Leon. He wondered, was he dead? Leon's wrists were lined with red marks from the straps, which made him realize he definitely was strapped in to face the needle. So what was going on now? The only sound in the room was a tick-tock sound from the polished silver clock on the wall. It said it was 4:35 p.m. Leon was scheduled to die at 4:30. The shoebox room was a lot darker than before. The dim lights flickered above head and highlighted the only door in the room. Leon stood, allowing the blood to flow back to his legs and feet before taking his first steps. The doorknob felt cold and rusty, and it squeaked when Leon opened the door. The corridor that Leon stepped into was not how he remembered it. It was much gloomier than before. It was like Leon had stepped into a room that had been hit by a bomb years before. At the end of the corridor, Leon spotted a brown teddy bear. As he approached it, he noticed its right eye was missing and there was a tear in its leg. It sent a chill through his body. The rest of the prison appeared to be abandoned. Leon couldn't explain it or explain why the prison interior had become completely black. Because of this, Leon couldn't make out where in the prison he was. It felt like he was in an infinite loop. Every corridor seemed to be the same. Some had cells, some didn't. He passed one cell which had a cold breeze coming from behind the bars. The cell gave Leon a strange familiar feeling. Was it his? Was it the cell he had spent 2.5 years in? A light dripping sound came from the cell next to the one with the breeze. Leon squeezed his skinny arm through the bars and could feel cool water splash into the palm of his hand. The sensation was soothing. He pulled his arm back through and heard a hard scratching sound coming from the next cell. Leon kept his distance from the bars. The pace of the scratching slowed, and there was suddenly a beam of light in the center of the cell. A match, fire. The small circle of fire grew bigger. Leon became uneasy. Fire makes everyone uneasy, he thought. As the flame became larger, Leon noticed a face behind the orange. There was a disfigured man standing behind the bars. His nose was replaced by an indent in his face, and one eye appeared to be black. His mouth grinned on one side, a grin that reminded Leon of the warden. The man appeared to be in all black. Either that or he was just a floating head, Leon thought. The flame went out and the man disappeared. Leon's mind raced. He couldn't figure out what was going on, but for some reason he felt kind of calm, like everything was going to be okay. Leon's optimistic feeling vanished when he heard crying coming from the next cell. Leon could feel his heart beat and his hands shake as his fingertips glided across the steel bars. The crying was peculiar. It was obviously a little girl, but it sounded distorted. The sound became louder and closer. Leon stepped back from the bars and felt his spine hit the hard wall. A little girl appeared behind the bars. She had blonde hair and was holding a brown teddy bear. Leon recognized it as the one he'd seen earlier. But the little girl's face struck Leon the most. He recognized it, but he couldn't place it. And then it clicked. It was the girl he was convicted of killing. Leon never liked to think about what happened that day the girl died. It was at a time of panic. The little girl was an orphan who had watched Leon kill a man who beat up his younger sister the year before. Leon grew to hate the man as it had left his sister traumatized. When he approached that man, he became hostile and violent. But Leon got the better hand and ended up killing him. Unfortunately, a little girl witnessed him stab the man in an alley. Leon panicked, and in a fit of rage, worry, and panic accidentally stabbed her, killing her. When the police arrived, Leon was sitting in the alley in the pouring rain next to 2 bodies. The little girl's face was pale. It was not how he remembered her. Leon knew this situation never made sense. Since he woke up, things hadn't seemed right, but logic never came into Leon's mind until now. He had no idea what was going on. The little girl disappeared into the black abyss the rest of the cell looked like, and the crying ceased seconds later. For the first time, he appreciated the silence. A familiar scratching sound came from the next cell. If Leon remembered correctly, this would be the last cell in this corridor. Each corridor had 5 cells each. Before Leon's eyes adjusted to the image behind the bars, he noticed the flame, but no one was holding it. He gently pressed forward towards the bars to see the source of the flame. His feet froze on the spot when he felt a bizarre feeling on his neck, breathing. In horror, Leon whipped round as fast as he could to see the same disfigured face, but he could see it more clearly now. An eye was black and the other was bright white with no pupil. There was nothing resembling a nose, only a dent in the face, and the mouth was closer to being vertical than horizontal. His lips were gray like the lips on a corpse. Leon realized he had jumped back into the bars in terror and was breathing heavily. The disfigured man placed a hand in front of him to silence Leon, who stared in disbelief. "What is going on?" The man let his hand fall. "You can put the pieces together, I am only a messenger," the man said in a deep, croaky voice. It scared Leon, but the man was right. He could put the pieces together. He was scheduled to die. Maybe he had. That would explain the way Leon felt. Emotionless. "A messenger for what?" Leon asked, his voice shaken. "I am only here to ask a question. Do you want to move on or stay?" "Move on to where?" Leon asked curiously. What was the disfigured man talking about? Leon waited for a reply, but the man never opened his mouth. He stared at Leon as though patiently waiting for a response. Leon only had a few pieces of what he assumed was a rather large puzzle. But one thing he knew for sure: anywhere had to be better than here. "I'll move on." "Very well." The man waved his hands in front of him and a strange circle appeared. It was orange. As seconds passed, the circle grew larger and larger until it was the same size as Leon. Leon stared in terror and he realized the orange was really fire. It terrified Leon, but he felt drawn to this portal of sorts. The man gestured for Leon to step into it. He had never felt terror like this, but he stepped forward into the portal, unsure about what was awaiting him, what else he would face in whatever life he was currently experiencing. We have now completed the third and final phase of the execution. Time of death, 4:34 p.m. That's it done, Warden. Danica is dead. Some people are born lucky while others are not, and Henry was most definitely part of the latter group. Being out of work and soon to be homeless, this wasn't how Henry had envisioned the start of his adult life. His sister was moving to Spain to be with her boyfriend and was selling her flat, which meant Henry had to find somewhere else to live. But first he needed to find a job. After realizing academia was not for him, Henry had left school at 16 armed with a very strong grade C in art. He hadn't yet decided what he wanted to do, and had planned on seeing what kind of jobs he was offered before deciding upon the most lucrative and using his wages to buy his one place. Unfortunately, the numerous offers of employment that Henry had envisioned were not very forthcoming, and he had spent the last few months applying for any and all jobs that came along. Sadly, he was either too young, lacked experience, or wasn't what they were looking for. Things had been starting to get desperate when, on one of his daily trudges down to the job center, he spotted an advert for a clerk at the body shop. Despite lacking any experience, being unable to type, and not having any real interest in cars, Henry applied for the job anyway. So it came as a complete surprise when the manager of the body shop phoned up to offer him the job. Henry couldn't believe his uncharacteristic good luck, and he had accepted it there and then. It might turn into something rewarding, he thought to himself as he sat alone behind the reception desk. This could be a way into mechanics. He could learn the trade, work up to a place in the garage, and one day run his own business. He just needed to get some enthusiasm about cars first, but that shouldn't be too difficult. He felt hopeful about his new career, but as the first week and then the second week went by without seeing a single engine, his grand dream started to look a little more distant. So far, he had spent his time just sat in reception placing orders for customers, taking phone calls and filling in forms. Every time a new order came, though, he would pass it to someone in the warehouse to be processed. He wasn't permitted into the warehouse himself yet, and he often wondered what lay behind that plain white door to the side of reception, with the stern sign that read, "Authorized personnel only." He could hear muffled voices talking from inside, but they weren't the usual coarse banter Henry associated with garages. This was a specialist operation, and so the staff probably had to maintain a high level of professionalism at all times. There was a peculiar smell that came through the door when someone leaned through to take the order sheets. It must be some kind of motor oil or grease, Henry concluded. He would learn all about it in time. He wanted to go back and look, but he needed to stay out here manning reception in case a customer came in. To the public, Henry was the face of the body shop, the manager had explained. Although he was always friendly and extremely polite, Henry wasn't sure if his was the face that the company should really be promoting, though. But saying that, his acne was starting to clear up now beneath his glasses, and his extraordinary good luck was still with him. Thanks to a chance conversation with one of his customers, he now had a room to rent. His new landlady, Mrs. Mildred, was a charming old dear who would come in most days to pick up a parcel. She didn't seem the type to be interested in the automotive industry, but nevertheless the warehouse would have a package waiting for her behind the reception desk most mornings before Henry arrived. So whenever he saw it, he knew she would be in later that day. She was as frail as anything, but her eyes sparkled with the kind of mischief that only old ladies could get away with. "Oh, thank you," Mrs. Mildred would say to Henry as he carried the package out to her car. "You're so kind to help me with this. You know I do really like your arms, so firm and strong. I'll know where to come if I need to borrow them sometime." She would proceed to squeeze his biceps and give him a very obvious wink as she hobbled out of the door, chuckling away to herself. If she was about 90 years younger, Henry may have thought she was flirting with him. Mrs. Mildred was one of the nice customers, but there were also some unpleasant ones, most notably Mr. McRude. Mr. McRude telephoned every day demanding to know where his order was. "Well, is it bloody there yet?" He had rasped down the phone in a dry, gravelly voice on Henry's first day on the job. "Error. What is it you want?" Henry had stammered. "My bloody order. I placed it with you 2 weeks ago. I don't know what kind of half-arsed outfit you're running there, but I need it now," he ranted. "The body shop. Specialists in body replacement services, it says here. Ha! Specialists indeed." Henry had felt his face flushing red, not sure how to respond to the impatient old codger. Mr. McRude interrupted. Is that all you can say? Well, it's not bloody good enough." Mr. McRude proceeded to phone in every day since, becoming ruder and more personal with his insults each time. Apparently his order was very special and needed to be brought in from Cuba, and there had been delays at customs, which was why it was taking so long. Every day Henry would brace himself for the verbal onslaught from the irate old git and explain again and again that it was out of his hands and there was nothing he could do. Despite his explanations, Mr. McRude continued to hold Henry personally responsible for the order and the delays, and even the political situation in the communist country which had led to the trade restrictions that were causing the whole problem in the first place. At last the order arrived, a thick brown package about 1 meter in length. It wasn't too heavy, and the manager said he should probably take it straight round to Mr. McRude's house as an example of good customer service. Henry felt his stomach drop a few feet at the instruction. This certainly wasn't how Henry would deal with rude customers when he was running his own business. But he had to please his boss, and so he hauled the parcel into the back of the company van and drove round to Mr. McRude's house. Although it wasn't heavy, the parcel was a long, awkward shape to carry for any length of time. Henry struggled down the overgrown garden path to Mr. McRude's rickety paint-chipped front door. The small bungalow looked dilapidated and reminded him of the house from The Wizard of Oz after it had landed in that magical land. Henry secretly loved that film, but any hint of magic or singing was dispelled by the sense of neglect that hung in the air. A large collection of unopened milk bottles were lined up by the front door, giving Henry the sense that no one had set foot outside the door for several days. The doorstep was also littered with a pile of Daily Mail newspapers and flyers for Indian takeaways and pizza delivery companies. The whole bungalow looked as run down, haggard and miserable as Mr. McRude sounded on the phone. Taking a deep breath, he rang the bell, hoping Mr. McRude wouldn't be in, so he could just leave the parcel by the door and go without having to face the miserable old winger. But as always, he wasn't that lucky. Henry heard some creaking and groaning of floorboards. Through the frosted glass of the door, he could see a shape lumbering down the hallway. As the shape loomed closer, Henry started to feel very uneasy about this visit. Some primal instinct was setting off an alarm bell at the back of his mind, and he felt an urge to leave the parcel on the step and bolt. He contemplated it for a moment, but then the door rattled and the moment was lost. From inside, someone struggled to undo a chain before the door slowly swung open on creaking hinges. Henry opened his mouth to introduce himself, but the words died in his throat as he looked upon the terrible sight that stood in the doorway. Henry recoiled as the image before him instantly burned into his memory, so he would always see it every time he closed his eyes. All he could do was gasp shock like a fish out of water, drowning in air as he stared at the thing before him. The gray, sallow face of Mr. McRude leered down at him through milky eyes, sunk deep into oversized eye sockets. Thin, wispy white hair curled down from the sore-encrusted scalp, and a lipless mouth formed a leering rictus grin as the thing that was Mr. McRude swayed gently in the doorway, leaning on a pair of rusted crutches. Mr. McRude was dead. Henry stumbled back in panic as the rotting stench of the grave wafted out from the open door, and Henry now recognized it as the same smell from the warehouse. He stared at the specter before him in cold terror, before blindly stepping backwards. His brain refused to accept what his eyes were telling him, and he forgot about the step and fell landing hard on his back. The parcel fell on top of him, preventing him from scrabbling to his feet and running. Henry struggled, panting out a scream but unable to find his breath. The impossible sight of the festering corpse took a shambling step through the doorway, and onto the step, narrowly avoiding a bottle of silver top. Towering over Henry, it reached out a gray, decomposing hand towards the terrified clerk with an animated creak of joints. "Watch it," the ill-tempered zombie snarled. His dry vocal cords sounded even dustier than they did on the phone. "I've waited long enough for that delivery, and I don't want to have to wait for another one if you break it, you clumsy oaf." Henry could do nothing but gibber like an idiot. "Here, open it for me." Mr. McRude growled impatiently, and Henry quickly worked at the tape on the parcel and opened the box with panicked fingers. When he saw what was inside the box, he gagged and shoved it away, kicking the box towards Mr. McRude and trying to put as much distance between it and himself. There, lying in a nest of bubble wrap and bags of ice, was a human leg cut off just above the knee. Mr. McRude carefully bent down and picked up the severed limb, and for the first time Henry noticed the deceased customer had only one leg protruding from his moldy burial clothes. "Good, this is what I wanted," said Mr. McRude, nodding with a measure of satisfaction. "Now, take that rubbish away with you. I've no need for it." As Henry hurried to gather up the empty box, Mr. McRude shuffled back inside but paused to look over his shoulder. "Oh, I understand you're Mrs. Mildred's latest lodger," he wheezed. "She's pleased you've moved in. She's wanted a pair of young, strong arms for some time now." Henry didn't look back as he scurried down the path to the relative safety van. As he clambered inside and locked the doors, he couldn't help wondering just how unlucky one person could be.